Visible and invisible evil in Sound of Freedom, a recent film that has provoked the ire of a certain establishment, progressive, globalist, that has inveighed against the film for its having turned a phenomenon that is contemporary to us, that of child trafficking, slavery across the globe, into a means to promote a certain ideological agenda. Is the film innocent in that respect? Not altogether, alas. Let us see what the problem is with the film and why the establishment is part of what is wrong. I was recently invited by an online platform to produce an article reviewing the film. The article I quickly produced, turned it in. The article was going to be published at once. I was contacted by the editor. Tomorrow we will publish this. But certain modifications were applied to the article. I read the modifications and I asked that the modifications be modified. That request was not granted. I was forced to withdraw the article. Why? Because the modifications turned the article into a piece of propaganda that fuels the tribal warfare, ideological tribal warfare that is ongoing. What's happening? What has happened with the film? The film is about, of course, as everyone who's seen or seen reviews of it is aware, it's about child trafficking, enslavement of children into sex trade, essentially. This horrific phenomenon that is booming. It's a booming market. How come? Why is it booming? The film does not ask. The film has us see a hero who is a white male family man, Christian. Now, these are not altogether fashionable traits. And this fellow is responding to a visible evil. The evil is that of child trafficking. Children are kidnapped, tortured in all ways, and sold as pieces of meat, or worse. Now, the hero is confronted with a situation, and he's responding to it by going to war. That is to say, by collaborating with police, by trying to stop local groups of people who are involved in this. So we have an approach that is obviously not preventive, as with medication today. Right? One might argue that the only true medication is preventive medication. But that is not what we have today. Preventive medication is out of the window, and so are preventive measures when it comes to moral decrepitude and barbarism. So instead of having a preventive measure here, or an appeal to it, what we have is an appeal to a certain type of God. It is the God of the heart, the God of sentiment, the God of feelings. Now, the hero of the story appeals to God and is able, on the basis of that appeal and of the sentiment that it represents, he is able to fight back in the face of evil, visible evil. Others in the film shy away from that battle, cave in, accept visible evil as a fatality, perhaps as a fleeting contingency that will go away on its own. We just have to live through it, let it be, move on. The hero rejects that proposition. He says, no, no, we must fight back. Now, what is at stake here, really? In both cases, what we have is ignorance of, one might say, and in fact, an obscuring of invisible evil, and thus the roots of visible evil. The tip of the iceberg is addressed, not the bulk of the iceberg. In fact, all effort is concentrated on the tip of the iceberg to the extent that it becomes a distraction, a terrible, disgracefully, a terrible distraction from invisible evil. Why are people monsters? That is taken for granted. It is taken for granted that men are normally barbaric, monstrous, horrific, degenerates. And the appeal to God is going to save us from that state of nature. Those who don't appeal to God will be feeding into barbarism. They will allow it, or they will actively pursue it. So the film is accepting the anthropology of progressivism, of modernity. Man is by nature barbaric. He needs to appeal to God. Now, the progressives today say, no, if you appeal to God, especially the patriarchal God that it seems to be implied by the film, especially if you're white, especially if you're male, if you're a father, right, then you worsen the problem. Everything gets worse. Why? Because God is used to, and has always been used, to promote evil, to cover up evil. We must expose evil today. Expose it without appealing to God, who can be used to conceal evil. Now, this film somewhat overturns this logic. He says, no, no, no. It turns out that only the appeal to God will allow you not to feed into evil. The film does precisely that. Other films have, of course, dealt with the phenomenon. They've been more captivating, too. Heck, even Sylvester Stallone produced a film that deals with this, right? The Last Rambo. So that is not the problem. That the characteristic of the film, of this recent film, Sound of Freedom, that has provoked the ire of the establishment. The establishment is offended by this regurgitation, this recycling of God, this return to God as supporting our fight for evil. That's terrible, especially because the God in question is a Christian God, and he's invoked by a white male, masculine, hyper-masculine male who is neither violent nor mushy. Right? He is not certainly not a rainbow person. He is not a violent fascist, evidently, nor a marshmallow. So, what is he? He is an illusion. He is a Don Quixote. He is a made-up figure that is impossible. This is the dreamed of Chevalier, King Arthur. We have to stop dreaming and realize what men are all about. Either they're repressed marshmallows, squashed, slimy little creepos, or they are violent thugs. So we have to address this problem, not by appealing to God, but by distracting people from their horrific nature and integrating them into the machine of an entertainment business, most notably. Now, in this respect, the film is very much part of that system. It is appealing to God, but as we should all be aware at this point, God is quite marketable. So, what are we to do? Are we to ignore the phenomenon of child trafficking and torturing of millions of children in the world? Millions of children today, more than any time at any time in the past, right? As the film warns. What are we to do? Or are we to finance the war against this enslavement? Well, let us consider this. The progressive critics say, well, if we finance this, you're just enriching the right-wing conspiracy theorists. It's not that bad. Let it go. The phenomenon is not so bad as it is portrayed to be. We can handle it. We got police to handle it, and no big deal. No big deal. Especially, do not appeal to God. Especially if you're white. Especially if you're male. Especially if you have children. If you're a father. That's bad, of course, because modernity is based on this anti-patriarchal sentiment, this anti-Platonist sentiment, this anti-theological sentiment. Right. So what would happen, they say, if you were to finance this film and the organizations tied to it that fight child trafficking? Well, most of the money would go to the organization and not to help the children. Well, let us consider an example on the other political spectrum, on the other side of the spectrum. California. Recently it came out that there has been over the past few years a state effort to address the problem of homelessness. So how do you do that? By flooding the state with money. How? Well, you have organizations that are supposed to take care of the homeless. Now, it turns out that at least 75% of the money that is flushed into this business goes to the bureaucrats. Only 25 at best % of the money goes to doing something productive for these homeless. And then that 25 at best is pretty much all a waste because the homeless are taken care of, quote unquote, for about 4 months, after which, well, they're dumped back in the street. So it's a complete waste. It's a distraction from the real problem. It's pointless or worse. And in that respect, the left progressives have a point about the film. The film may wind up being a distraction. Right? Should we then reject God, the appeal to God? Right? Well, what happens if you reject the appeal to God? You can be a very progressive person and still be very spiritual. After all, we've seen this with some freak pervert that it was just, I believe, from Brazil. It was just some witch man who was supported by Oprah and as some kind of a saint, right? Turns out he was involved in sex violence, perpetration of horrific crime on young girls. Okay, throughout the years. All right. So you can go witchcraft. You can get rid of God, the Christian God, and go postmodern. That doesn't help. You have all these sex islands, and the film, incidentally, does refer to a sex island, such as this Weinstein and Epstein and all these creepos business. Of course, they have the Virgin Guys Island, which is right next to it, and they would go. The Virgin people would obviously be in touch with the Epstein Island people. Now you can ignore God and still have all of these sex islands, right? Which is to say, islands where young kids are dumped as slaves and butchered, tortured. It's all, everything goes. So obviously that doesn't solve the problem. You get rid of God, you can still have global Sodom and Gomorrah. So what do? Go back to that old appeal to God? So you have today this battle, this tribal warfare, which is really leaving unattended the bulk of the iceberg. The battle between conservatives, so-called conservatives, and progressives is fought on the level of the tip of the iceberg. And they're both violent. They both tend to seek violent solutions to problems. Money, the machine. Inevitably, at some point, the machine becomes and calls for violence. It is in the nature of the machine to be inhuman. Law as machine, institutions conceived mechanically as machines to address problems mechanically. We conceive problems mechanically as local problems that have solutions, technical solutions. This film does precisely this. And it goes together with the progressives who swear by the technocratic approach to life. So, what we have in this film is a great distraction. Should we reject the film altogether? Well, to reject it altogether means to fall back into the cradle of radical progressivism, which is global Sodom. So what do you do with the film? Well, I mean, the battle is being played out, so this intervention is not going to do anything. Those who have followed up to this point, will be more prone to reflect rather than to respond in the element of mechanical reflex. Yeah? So that is the way to go. You see the problem as a manifest evil, and now you start thinking back, returning in the element of reflection to the bulk of the iceberg. That's what we need today. Not tribal warfare, not ideological bickering. And that is why the article that I had produced was withdrawn. We'll see if somewhere else it will appear. But for now, this video will have to do.